Histobiograph.
What does it mean to be a mother? Is it holding your child close, shielding them from every storm life throws your way? Is it surviving, even if it means betraying the deepest truths of your soul? Or is it sometimes the courage to let go, to protect something greater than yourself? Imagine this. You're 22 years old. In your arms is your newborn. Their tiny breath is your entire world. You have status, safety, a shining future ahead. And then you choose to walk into the darkness of death. You are not alone. Beside you is your enslaved servant. She is also a mother. She too is willing to give up everything. This is not just a story of martyrdom. It is a quiet rebellion. Two women breaking every Roman idea of power, class, and motherhood. This is the true story of Vivia Perpetua and Felicitas. Is there ever a moment when your duty as a mother stands in conflict with your deepest beliefs? Chapter 2, Arrested, When Everything Falls Apart. In the year 203, under the bright skies of Carthage, Perpetua's world collapsed. At just 22 years old, nursing her infant son, she was arrested along with Felicitas and 3 young men, Revocatus, Saturninus, and Secundulus. They were catechumens, still learning the faith, preparing to dedicate their lives to God through baptism. The prison was a nightmare. The air thick with filth, the darkness pressing in like it wanted to swallow all hope. The moans of prisoners echoed through the corridors, mixed with the shouting of guards. Perpetua, a woman raised in luxury, now faced violence and chaos. But the deepest pain wasn't the chains or the darkness. It was her baby boy. In her diary, her handwriting trembling, she wrote, "I was in agony for my child, who could not survive without me." Her father, a devoted pagan who loved her dearly but couldn't understand her faith, came to the prison to beg. He knelt. "Have mercy on your son, Perpetua. Have mercy on your father. Don't destroy our family. Please give up this madness. Pater, inquam vides verbi gratia vas hoc iacens, ursilum sive aliid?" Perpetua looked at him and replied with a simple but piercing question. "Father, do you see this little jar here? Can it be called anything other than what it is? In the same way, I cannot be anything but what I am, a Christian." Then, a flicker of light broke through the darkness. She was allowed to keep her baby with her in prison. To her, it was a gift from God. She wrote, "Suddenly, the dungeon became a palace, and I preferred to be there more than anywhere else." When you stand at the crossroads between being a mother and staying true to your faith, what would you choose? Is there any value worth sacrificing everything for? As Perpetua found light in the shadows, her companion Felicitas faced a very different kind of fear. Chapter 3, Felicitas. Fear is not death. Felicitas, a slave, did not fear death. Her true fear was being left behind, surviving alone while her fellow believers departed. Roman law forbade the execution of pregnant women, and with her belly 8 months full, she knew she might be spared. But to Felicitas, survival was not a victory. It was loneliness. It was betrayal of the faith she had chosen. Just 2 days before the scheduled execution, in the cold prison cell, Felicitas went into labor. Agonizing contractions tore through her body. A nearby guard sneered, "If you're already screaming like this, how will you handle the claws of the beasts? Modo ego patior quod patior. Illi caute malius erit in me qui patietur prome. Quia ego poilu passuasu." Felicitas lifted her head, eyes steady, and answered, "Now I suffer what I must, but there another will suffer in me, for I too will suffer for him." Those words were more than a reply. They were a declaration, defiant, unwavering, echoing through the cold stone walls. Her baby girl was born in pain and entrusted to a Christian family to be raised, just as Perpetua had done with her son. 2 mothers, 2 children, 2 lives that seemed worlds apart, now united in one unshakable faith. They let go of their children, not out of indifference, but because they believed in a life greater than their own. Could you give up the most precious thing you have to protect your beliefs? What would keep you standing even when everything else collapses? On the final night before their deaths, these two women turn a prisoner's last supper into a symbol of love and liberation. Chapter 4. Sina Libera, a feast of love. The night before their execution, according to Roman tradition, the condemned were granted one last meal, Sina Libera. For many, it was a time of weeping, a painful goodbye, but for Perpetua, Felicitas, and their companions, it became a feast of love and faith. They sat together, breaking rough bread, drinking bitter wine. Laughter echoed, not because they weren't afraid, but because they had found freedom through belief. One of them, Satyrus, locked eyes with the guards and declared, "Remember our faces, so that you will recognize us on the day of judgment. Crastinus dies vobis non sufficit, ut nos spectitus quos odistus. Amici hodi in nimici cross, tamen facium nostram diligenta note, ut nos in illo di judici recognoscatis." To the Romans, the scene was madness, prisoners laughing and preaching on the edge of death. But to them, it was freedom. The fleeting life of this world was nothing compared to the eternal truth they held. Have you ever found joy in the darkest hour of your life? Is there anything that could make you feel truly free, even in chains? As dawn broke, they stepped into the arena, not as victims, but as living witnesses to faith. Chapter 5. Into the Arena. Freedom, Indiana Death. On March 7th, 203, during the festival honoring the Emperor Septimius' severe son, Perpetua Felicitas, and their fellow believers were led into the arena of Carthage, not as helpless sacrifices, but as living witnesses carrying the light of faith in their hearts. They walked forward without fear. Perpetua, calm and noble, like a queen entering her palace. Felicitas, only 3 days after giving birth, stood strong, her eyes blazing with conviction. The crowd fell silent, stunned by their serenity. Perpetua placido vultus surbatur, et tanquam matrona Christi, amata adeo. Perpetua walked with a peaceful face, like a matron of Christ, beloved by God. The guard tried to force them to wear the robes of pagan priests, a ritual meant to symbolize rejection of their faith. Perpetua stood tall, eyes sharp, and declared, "We came here of our own will to defend our faith. We will not deny it." Her words silenced the guards. In that moment, they were no longer prisoners. They were conquerors. Is peace in the face of death the truest form of freedom? What would you stand for, even if the whole world stood against you? But the arena was not just a test of faith. It was the place where their bodies would stand against an empire. Chapter 6. Torture. Bodies against empire. The male believers stepped out first. They faced lions and bears, their bodies torn apart as the crowd roared with delight. Then came the turn of Perpetua and Felicitas. The two women were stripped, wrapped in nets, and released to face a wild cow, a symbol of the goddess Juno, protector of Roman women. The crowd, long accustomed to violence, suddenly fell silent. They saw a noblewoman and a nursing mother standing side by side, unshaken by fate. The horror etched on the spectators' faces forced the guards to clothe them again. Perpetua was tossed by the beast, her body hurled into the air. When she regained consciousness, she pulled her tunic back down to cover her thigh, more mindful of modesty than of her bleeding wounds. Tunica malater discisam ad velamentum femoris reduxit pudoris potius memor quam doloris. She adjusted her torn tunic to cover her thigh, more mindful of modesty than of pain. She stood up and reached out to Felicitas, who had also been struck down. Two mothers, two battered bodies, still standing before the might of an empire. In the moment of pain, what makes you rise again? Would you dare stand beside those the world despises? But their story did not end in agony. It marked the beginning of an eternal legacy. Chapter 7, Death, Equality before God. At the Santa Bavaria Gate, the place of final execution, Perpetua and Felicitas stood together. They exchanged the kiss of peace. a Christian ritual that erased all boundaries of class. Slave and noblewoman, mother and martyr, now equal before God. The executioner, a young man, trembled as he raised his sword. His first strike missed, piercing Perpetua's shoulder. She did not cry out. Instead, she took his hand and guided the blade to her own throat. Her diary, as if written from eternity, records. Perhaps such a woman could not be killed unless she herself willed it. Perpetua autem ut aliquid doloris gustaret inter ossa compuncta exulavit. Et errantem dexteram tyrunculi gladiatoris ipsa in iugulum sum transculate. In that moment, Perpetua was no longer a victim. She was the master of her fate, a flame unextinguished. Can death be a kind of victory? What legacy will you leave when facing life's final trials? Their deaths were not the end. Their voices still echo, carved into the walls of history. Chapter 8, Legacy, A Voice Across Time. Perpetua's diary, preserved in the Passion of Perpetua and Felicitas, is one of the oldest surviving Christian texts. One of the rare ancient works written by a woman. She didn't just die, she spoke, and her voice, 2,000 years later, still echoes. In a world that silenced women, Perpetua carved her voice into time. In an empire that treated slaves as invisible, Felicitas was canonized, standing equal to her mistress. They shattered invisible walls of power, class, and prejudice. Fortasse talis femina non posset mori, nisi ipsa venet. Perhaps such a woman could not die unless she herself chose to. Their story is more than history. It's a reminder that the smallest voices can shake an empire. How will your voice echo? What will you leave for the next generation? Their story poses a question for us, those still living in a world full of injustice. The story of Perpetua and Felicitas is not just a chapter from the past. It is a challenge to us, to those still living in a world divided by class, race, and gender. They embraced pain, not out of a death wish, but because they refused to live a lie. What would you sacrifice for your beliefs? What are you willing to lose to truly be free? And when your child, or someone you love, asks what you stood for, what will you say? If this story moved you, share your thoughts. What other forgotten voices from history deserve to be heard? Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and join us in lighting up the dark corners of history. And remember, sometimes the quietest voices echo the longest.